Hi, everyone. I'm pleased to introduce our panel, Detroit as a Hub for Radical Innovation. I'd like to thank the Detroit community for hosting this wonderful event. I've spoken with a number of representatives from that community, and they're all quite excited and quite engaged in seeing how we can make radical exchange successful, and particularly how we can help integrate with local communities around the world and implement these changes that we all care deeply about. And I'm really excited for this panel because we've put together a group of representatives from different aspects of the Detroit community who all bring their unique perspectives and unique understandings to how Detroit has been incubating new sets of ideas that can help Detroit grow and help teach the rest of the country what implementing some of these ideas look like in practice. And so with that, I'd like to welcome the panel to the stage.
Okay, I guess I'll start. Good morning, everyone. My name is Fairuz Saad, and my connection to all of this is that previous to my current role, I currently work for the governor of Michigan. I served as Detroit's first director of immigrant affairs, and so we were looking at the kind of nexus of immigration, immigrant integration, and how really we can work with the immigrant community at large, both locally and nationally, to really help Detroit grow, to help immigrants, put them on pathways to economic prosperity, and really to promote Detroit as a welcoming city, as we say, as a place that is open to people from everywhere and anywhere around the world, from refugees to more high-skilled immigrants in other places. And so I will be your moderator for today. My jobs is to kind of help get the discussion going and keep time to make sure we stay on time this morning. And so I'm going to start by kind of letting our panelists introduce themselves. We have Jonathan Wee on my right, Ingrid Lafleur in the middle, and then Gerry. Oh, I forgot your last name. Sorry. Pathan Dorf at the end. So I'm going to pass the mic off to them, and 2 minutes each, guys.
Thanks, Fairuz. I'm Jonathan Hui. I'm a program officer with the Kresge Foundation's Detroit program. And I started my career here in Detroit as a high school civics teacher, and kind of worked in the intersection through my role at a high school in the intersection of education and community development, and thinking about the role of schools in public spaces and how we integrate schools in kind of rooted in specific geographies and specific neighborhoods here in the city. And just a kind of a brief background on the work that Kresge does in Detroit specifically. We are a national foundation that does grant making in American cities. Within the city of Detroit, we focus on a few areas and really thinking about how, again, we're working across disciplines to land in place. We support our arts and culture ecosystem, early childhood, and community development. And cutting across all of those is intentionality around building the capacity of leaders and organizations to execute that work, and a focus on thinking about racial equity and how disinvestment and investment based on race in our city has contributed to the systems that exist in each of those three places, and how we can kind of work to address some of those root causes. So just a brief introduction and kind of about myself and our work, and just really looking forward to our conversation today.
Hi, my name is Ingrid Lafleur. I am a curator. I focus on Afrofuturism. I am a pleasure activist, sometimes an artist, and I am currently the Chief Community Officer for EOS Detroit. EOS Detroit is a Black producer for EOS and two sister chains. And that is a blockchain company. And it's a little complicated if you don't know about it, but I am the person who actually teaches people about blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. I have this really wonderful role of really looking at what it means to introduce emerging tech into communities of color here in Detroit specifically. And we are working on a project to really support community initiatives, especially cooperatives or cooperative-like organizations. And I'll probably get more into that later. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. My name is Gerry Pathan, which Pathan, much like me, looks complicated, but is rather simple. So there we go. It's one of the Harry Potter names. So I moved to Detroit about 10 years ago, 2009, co-founder and CEO of a property mapping and data company called Loveland Technologies. We run a website at landgrid.com where we've collected nationwide information about property shapes, ownership, land use. No matter where you're in from out of town, you could go to that site and look up who owns everything in your city, everything in your neighborhood. And there's some mapping tools that go alongside of that, an app to go out and do property surveys, and easy ways to color code and sift through land use information to get insights about who owns things in your area, how land is taxed, zoned, really how we use and inhabit the space of the earth. And the reason we do that work is really entirely because of Detroit. So, I was thinking about the topic of this and radical innovation in Detroit. I want to talk about other people besides myself and ourselves, but I will share that this city has so many influences that will force you to learn from it and address them. It was difficult for us as a tech company to just be a tech company in the city and then work elsewhere. There are so many interesting things and needs in Detroit that it sort of demands that you pay attention to them. And one of the things that demanded our attention is that the underlying issue of who owns the land in Detroit, who is at risk of foreclosure, where are there buildings that need to be repurposed or taken down, how do communities control their land or not, who is being gentrified by outside investment coming in when people aren't even aware that that's happening. We recognized that there was a real need to map the city at that granular parcel level and then make that information public to share with people. And that's really taken us on a voyage where we interface with community groups, block clubs, activists, government, and business, all of which has kind of added up to a really heady Detroit innovation experience.
Great. Oop.
Just beat it.
Just beat it. So we thought we'd start off the discussion by looking at this question of why Detroit. I'm sure that's probably why a lot of you are here. For myself, I was born and raised in the Detroit area. My parents are immigrants, and they came here. They came to Detroit in the mid-'70s and opened up a meat market, actually, in Detroit's Eastern Market. The irony of my life is that I'm a vegetarian. But nevertheless, meat has been the provider of our household. And so what brought me to Detroit was really being able to kind of give the city back what I felt like my parents benefited from. And so I'm going to pose that all to you. Why Detroit? What brought you here? Why are you staying? Why is this a place to grow? Who wants to start? Start at the end, maybe start with you.
I can start because I'm like at this point kind of like a newbie, old bee, like in a sense. You know what I mean? I figure if I've been in town for a decade now. It's been a very interesting decade, and I think in 2009 when I came to the city, it was still very much at a period when most of the people that I met were like, why? Like, why? Or like, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to do to us? Why are you here? What's wrong with you? Because it's kind of like the penguin running in the opposite direction. And a bit. I mean, I'm not even exaggerating that much. I think for kind of the mood that I felt. And I had been previously in New York for a few years and in San Francisco working on internet startup stuff. and just had this general mood that was like, if the network is supposed to connect people everywhere, and if you're really supposed to be creative with it, why are things so constrained in those two areas where if you want to start something, you got to go find a venture capital investment. They're going to want to put 2 zeros behind the valuation of whatever you do. Everything follows these trends of, at the time, it's just social this, social that. And it was just kind of, my brain kind of was overflowing, thinking like there have to be other places with different influences where you can do internet things and that will help you learn and arrive at new ideas. And so that's really what brought me to the city. And boy, I didn't know what to expect, but I'm so happy that I did, because the last 10 years, I think, really shook me to wake me up, in the sense that I think I would have told you that I know how cities work. You know, I kind of know what people do to be successful with businesses, I think, even though I had never really been successful with it. And that's kind of the attitude you get, I think, in those places where you need to be louder, but not necessarily know what you're talking about. And so Detroit really brought things down to earth, because you know, I want to pass the mic and not talk too long, but the things that you hit when you're in a city that has had 2 million people and has a third of that population right now, that has major racial issues in how Detroit, as an 80% African-American city, gets along with the suburbs and the rest of the state, which are basically the inverse of that, and all the historic trauma that comes along with the city that's been disinvested and not supported by its neighbors. You get down to earth with your highfalutin tech ideas real fast. You know, and you start hanging out with people who, well, that's what got me here, and that was the exciting part that I think keeps me here, is that it's helped make me and our team a more holistic tech and data builder. And so when I watch the conversations happening right now where tech seems detached from what's going on in the real world, I'm not going to say we're perfect at it, but Detroit has given me an amazing training and a network to be like, oh, I know not to make any of those mistakes now, and feel that genuinely, not just to not want to get in trouble, but to realize we can't provide value to people if we're not dealing with people on the terms of where they are and listening. So that's what got me here, and that's what's made me stay.
Yeah. Thank you, Gerry, for sharing that. I think a lot of people could stand to hear that in this conference. But I think that also, sorry, that wasn't a but you know, there's so much to learn from Detroit, and that's the reason why I came back home. I'm a born and raised Detroiter. I was born in the 70s, so I experienced a very different Detroit than what you're experiencing. It was 99.9% Black. I call it the golden era. It was not perfect, but it was beautifully Black. And I felt safe. I was able to experiment and grow without thinking about my Blackness. And that's a privilege, I think, quite honestly, as a person of color in this nation. I came back home because I had lived already in the Village in New York and Atlanta and Pittsburgh and these cities that had already gone through the transformation. So I kind of came after the fact. And so I knew what happened after the fact, but I kind of was curious what would happen during. What is that look like on the ground every day? And then also Detroit is my home. It's majority Black. It's one of the main reasons why I'm still in this country. I love living in majority Black or of color cities. I feel safer there. And then also my family is here. So, you know, I came from the New York art world, and I put on these different salons to try and see what the art market is like in Detroit. And I quickly found, kind of like your journey, Gerry, that Detroit is facing so many challenges. Me trying to sell contemporary art just seems ridiculous. And so my entire curatorial practice shifted. And that's when I started looking at how Afrofuturism, which is a way of looking at the Black experience using speculative modalities like science fiction or fantasy, could be used to really imagine new futures for our city. But the theory wasn't enough. And so that is why I'm now working, I'm skipping a whole bunch because the time is over. But, you know, after you teach children who are living without water, when you understand what poverty really looks like on the ground, in the New York art world, no one cares about that. So here you're forced to deal with it because you see it every day as you're driving and as you're going to your grocery store, as you're going to the park. You cannot ignore it. And I like that challenge. I think all of us can agree that that challenge has probably made us grow and expand in ways that you cannot even imagine. And that's why it's so important that when people who want to work in Detroit live here first and connect with people first and really just be humble and learn. And that's what I had to do. And I'm from here. I was born and raised here. And I really had to take a step back and humble myself and really learn from people like Tawana Petty and other really beautiful activists about what it means to be in the city. How do you properly contribute? And how do you learn and hopefully co-create with people like Gerry?
Thank you for sharing. I think for me, Detroit was happenstance. Actually, coming to Detroit was a confluence of a lot of factors, but I think staying here was not happenstance, right? Staying here was the result of an outsider coming into the city that I think saw a city that had an authenticity that I had not experienced in my own hometown. An authenticity that said, I'm going to welcome you here to be my neighbor, but I need you to acknowledge that that our city has a collective sense of identity, has a history, has a culture, and I need you to honor that. And that we heard that from my neighbors, from students, from families, and I think that is what makes Detroit special. Is a sense of ownership and of an identity that says we welcome outsiders like myself and like how I've been welcomed by my neighbors, but also a sense of identity that is rooted in the city's history and the city's culture that says we need you to honor that. And I think having been invited into that was really important for me and a decision to stay and to make Detroit home is being welcomed into what it means to be part of the city's identity and the city's culture and the city's history, and to be alongside neighbors that are opening their homes and building community for longtime residents and for newcomers to be able to do that together. And I think that makes our city and our city's neighborhoods really special.
Okay. So, Gerry, when my dad was talking about moving his business into the city, because they were in Dearborn when they settled, everyone had the same, why would you go to Detroit? That's crazy. There's nothing there. It's not going to work. And he's been there for over 40 years, and the Eastern Market has certainly had a revitalization that we're now benefiting from. But it really takes that investment, that risk, and people kind of really seeing Detroit for what it is and what it will be and can be, as opposed to what it is right now in this very moment. And so I think everything that everyone here said is really kind of speaks to that from your own personal perspectives. So for our next question. As you know, the title of this is Detroit as a Hub for Radical Innovation. And, we kind of got together prior to being here today to talk about what are some of the themes we wanted to highlight here. And one thing that we talked about is what radical and or innovation actually means, what it means to each of us. And the discussion that ensued really showed that there was no one definition. Everyone kind of had their own perspectives about what that means. In grad school, I remember a professor once saying that innovation is just stealing one person's ideas or one city's or one state's or one company's ideas and making it your own. And so, so to that end, kind of what about your work in Detroit has been radical or innovative? And maybe even kind of what is it about this place, or what is it about your work specifically that has fostered that type of thinking and environment?
I can start. I think that the first thing that I've learned over kind of working in education, working in philanthropy in Detroit is innovation isn't always new. And it's something that's been very humbling to realize that too. Innovation isn't always new because ideas that have worked in the city and when we think about ideas that have worked in place in specific neighborhoods, in specific contexts, a lot of them have already existed. A lot of them have already existed, but sometimes when we think about innovation, sometimes we've kind of brought a philosophical approach to, well, I read this and therefore I think you should do this. Funders have been guilty of that, but something I think we've learned is innovation has existed with block club captains in the city, with longtime residents that have done work in their neighborhoods. And it might not be the shiny new object, but it's something that has worked for the last 50 years in our neighborhoods. And sometimes what innovation means is creating the space, creating the structures, providing the resources for the ideas that have existed, that longtime residents have led, for them to be amplified, for them to be elevated, and for that vision to be shared across the city to different neighborhoods, to different block clubs. And I think it's a realization that sometimes metrics can't measure innovation. We can't measure sometimes what it means to scale an idea that started at a block club that worked in a specific neighborhood, because sometimes trying to measure everything sometimes loses the humanity of the work we're trying to do, and loses the narrative of place. And that was incredibly humbling, but also knowing that, and thinking through, so what are the innovations needed to create the structures and to create the space for the work that has already happened in the city to be elevated to institutions, to be elevated to funders, to be elevated to municipal government. And at Kresge, something we're thinking through is we have funding initiatives. We have open calls. Kresge Innovative Projects Detroit, for example, is one where neighborhood level placemaking projects can be funded. But we also know that we have blind spots. We know that sometimes how we fund these programs are based on kind of our own definition of innovation. And so the question then is, how do we create the structures, right? How do we work with local capacity building intermediaries? How do we work with different partners to increase access for the block club captain that has done this work for 40 years and wants to share that work with the neighborhood next door and say, we think we have a great idea that you might want to learn from, to share from block club captain to block club captain that have maybe never gotten philanthropic funding before to do some of those projects. How do we build their capacity to be able to access funding, to build the structures necessary to say, you didn't get a grant this time, let's actually talk through why that might be and provide you with the resources so that you can be more competitive next time, because you might have never written a grant before. But I think philanthropy's role is to create the space for those innovations that might not be new, that have existed for years, to then be elevated across different sectors. And so that's one thing, and I'll let others share more too.
So you've got me thinking about how dependent Detroit is on the foundations. And so my work is really about how do we create our own pool of resources and financial, hopefully kind of a stronger financial structure so that we don't always have to depend on foundations. After reading Decolonizing Wealth, I'm quite skeptical of sometimes the agenda. And so we don't always want to have to explain that to receive the funds to be able to do the thing that we do. So I have so many friends that inspire me, like Onyx Ashanti, who does 3D printing and has a 3D printing lab, creates his own exoskeleton musical instrument. You can find him on TED. He's done a TED Talk. But, in this lab that is literally in an abandoned house that used to be a trap house, you could go in and learn about 3D printing at any point in time. For me, that's radical. he accepts crypto, but he doesn't really, into money. And so, to be able to just say, hey, there's another way, decentralized production is really empowering for communities so that we don't have to depend on all these other sources. Government has already failed us. We're very clear on that. So, what are the other ways that we can create resiliency in our own communities using hopefully other kinds of methods like tech? I ran for mayor of Detroit, and it was inspired by the work that people are doing on the ground and seeing that Detroiters don't really know that there are, number one, all these wonderful people who are working maybe in, it feels almost like a silo, it's just that Detroit's so big. But then also to know that there are other options for us to be able to grow. There are other ways, there's other structures. And so my platform could be considered somewhat radical in the way that I was proposing universal basic income based off of a cryptocurrency Detroit would create. As a result of proposing just that one thing, there are many other things, of course, I've been able to really dive deeper into how to actually make those things happen, and I'm working to do that. So right now, EOS Detroit is launching Detroit, which is a decentralized autonomous community, which is like a digital cooperative to hopefully support mesh networks that are going around in our city. Detroit, right now, 40% of Detroit does not have access to internet. So as we're talking about communication and growing and trying to foster initiatives and move towards a future, when 40% of our city does not have broadband access, how do we make that? How is that possible? But at the exact same time, what complementary currencies can help support that, and then hopefully support our local businesses and create an economy that is from the people, empowered and led, and completely co-designed by the people. And that independence is what I'm striving for, and that I've always been trying to look towards. I'm tired of asking for permission, asking for money to do and create the thing that we know really works within our communities because we've already been doing it. And so that is the, I guess, radical work that I'm doing. Gerry?
Your mayoral campaign was really cool. It's definitely look up Ingrid's platform. It was a interesting complementary package of things that she brought into that discussion. So really quickly, I think I'm going to try to share kind of like a arc of some of the things that I think we did, whether or not they were successful, that I think were innovative. They may have been accidentally innovative by being weird ideas sometimes, and then maybe bring into it kind of like my current sense of the mood of innovation in Detroit, because I'm actually, I don't want to say this in like a bad way, but just to be very honest, I feel like Detroit is not, as a city and as a city government, not innovating anywhere near it could or should be, because we have a lot of problems that are going completely unaddressed, and we're relying a lot just on money and development right now to try to fix things, which is not unhelpful when people are investing in your city, but it leaves a lot of things out of the equation when you're not working on civic participation and thinking about things a little bit differently. So I don't know if this was innovative, but it was definitely weird. So maybe this is for the Weird Exchange conference, how we got started. 2009, my two co-founders, Mary and Larry, and I knew we wanted to do something with putting land on the internet in some way. So we had notions of like crowdfunding and social ownership, and could you put properties in the city online and have people invest in them and work on them? So we launched kind of this ridiculous project where we bought a $500 vacant lot and we put a grid of square inch parcels on top of it. And people could go to a website, which is still up. It's inchternet.com, like the internet, but with inch. And you could inch vest in a square inch or multiple square inches of the land. Yeah, you remember. It was like, who are these people? And you could visit it in person or you could visit it online. And so it was kind of like crowdfunding. We were one of the first projects on Kickstarter with it. And a lot of the feedback we got was like, this is cute and weird, and I have no idea what you're trying to do, but could you do this kind of mapping like life size? You've got these cool interactive maps. Could you take property information about who owns everything in the city or what's at risk of foreclosure and build a map that people could go to and look that information up? And so we did. We kind of scaled from inches to citywide, and that work got popular locally. And when Detroit went into bankruptcy, 2014, we were actually hired by a blight coalition, a task force that was supported by the White House and had a number of foundations. Kresge was a part of that, and Dan Gilbert from Quicken Loans, and basically tasked us like, can you hire Detroiters to go out to every single parcel of property in the city and identify current land use condition and occupancy? And so we actually helped manage that project, and we did it. And it was kind of this one of the first times that the lights kind of came on for what does the genetic code of Detroit's land use and vacancy look like right now in detail. And that really kicked open, I think, kind of the open data scene in the city to the extent that it exists right now. The city really invested in putting more information about its activities out onto a web portal. But just to cap this right now, one of the things that's been very interesting there is we very much experience this tension where sometimes the data doesn't say what you want it to say, and it becomes, depending on the story you want to tell, not necessarily advantageous to show people that even when you're tearing down thousands and thousands of homes, you're also foreclosing on people and more properties are becoming vacant. So we had to go through we're still going through a lot of pressures on that, where we toe the line between being advocates and activists on certain issues, as well as being a service provider. So
Great.
Not to end it short, but that's a basket of things that I think we've kind of gone through. And something I'm a little bit disappointed in the city with right now is that we're pushing this comeback narrative so hard that I think we're afraid to show some of the things that we still need to work on. And if it can't be solved by an investment or a development, then we don't know exactly what to do with it. It's a generalization, but I think it's an important one to bring up.
So I have one of the most difficult jobs of being the timekeeper, because
I'm so sorry.
I've become really, like,
You
I
can see we're
forget the
each going
time where
slightly
it's going,
further
and
on
I'm
it,
just
so-
as surprised when it goes off. So, so we do want to get into question and answer, but one last thing I want to touch on, and so I'm a community organizer. That's kind of how I started my career. And I often say that you should never leave a room without having a call to action or something that you leave people with, some sort of message or something to take back home. And so I'm going to leave it a little open-ended for you all. And what do you want that message to be to this audience? And whether it's what do you want them to leave in their understanding of Detroit, of the work that you all are doing, or what are some things they can take back to their own states and cities and organizations with?
Okay, so yeah, two quick things. I would say I think that a lot of people at this conference are mission-driven, mission-oriented people. There's business people here, but a lot of people kind of have the mission component first. And I would say something that we've learned through our journey of getting our work funded and try to figure out how to sustainably grow a team, as we've done, is make sure that as you're pursuing your mission, try to build some sort of a business model that's not reliant on either big investors or reliant on foundations to sustain you. Because I found it's very easy to get sort of injections of resources to do work with. But if you can find a way to provide value to people to get paid so you can grow and not rely on granting or trying to get investment from somebody who might not ultimately like what your mission is, that's something that I think comes up in Detroit a lot that may resonate with some in the room. And I would just encourage people to run for office. I think one of the things that I've learned in the city is I wanted to totally kind of ignore what was going on with government, because it's like, oh, we can just come up with solutions, and we can, but it is so powerful, even if it's a lower office or a neighborhood board, getting more people who wouldn't typically do that with the way with the kind of thoughts that are happening in this room, I think is really key in making things change. And so I would encourage people to run for office, even if it's a neighborhood level or a local level. It's very important to do.
Awesome. Because I guess I'm a curator and a very community oriented, one of the things, I've been in the tech industry for about a year now. One of the things that doesn't seem to be talked enough about, I think the first panel on Friday touched upon it. I really want people to be more self-reflective. I really want people to kind of dig into their own biases. I really want them to start working on decolonizing their minds, because you're creating the tech and it's infected by that, and how the tech acts is it comes out, right? So we have that blatant example of the self-driving cars that don't detect darker skin. But there's a lot of nuances actually that I'm starting to see, at least within blockchain, that some of the ideas and philosophies are coming through, and how it's being built or even discussed, the language around it, how it's introduced to people, and it's all coming from what's going on in our own minds. And without doing that self-check, you're just going to create more harm. And the very thing that we're talking about, being radical and liberation and all of these things, is actually BS at the end of the day, because you're not actually trying to shift your consciousness and how you interact with other humans, and how you perceive other humans, if you even see them as human at all. So, that is really, 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 really important. And so that is the thing that I take that to your tech companies and to your communities. Do the work of going inside.
Thank you. Thank you, Ingrid. I think the one lesson, biggest lesson from Detroit that I might share is really thinking about, when we're thinking about what's radical or what's innovative, thinking about that rooted in the context of place. And we've said that a couple times, but really kind of what is the culture and the identity of the place you're working in, and wherever you're from, wherever in the country or the world you're going back to, thinking about innovation in the context of what has already happened and honoring the work that has already happened in place. And I think, Ingrid, I don't disagree with you about building power of the social sector, whether it's nonprofits or community organizations, who no longer have to rely on institutions that have traditionally held power. A lot of them are institutions that have disinvested in communities of color. A lot of them are institutions that have made it harder for certain communities to access, whether it's money, whether it's voice, whether it's influence, and thinking about how power is built outside of traditional institutions, whether it's philanthropy, whether it's government, and how do we have community organizations that represent place, that have power and have voice to be able to elevate what residents are saying, and I think that if we're holding on to that piece of what innovation means in place, I think that can really be a sustainable kind of vision in the long term.
So we have a little over 5 minutes for question and answer. If anyone wants to, I guess, come up to the mics and either pose it to a specific panelist or just a open-ended question for anyone to answer.
Yeah, I just have a quick open-ended question about what specific problems are not being solved here. You had mentioned that investment isn't solving all the problems. And Ingrid, you mentioned, for example, 40% of the people here don't have broadband access. So I was wondering if there's other specific examples that we can hear today about problems that aren't being solved by the current paradigm.
I mean, I'll name a few, and that ones everybody sees what they see. I look a lot at this land grid, so I see problems that come through that. But everything exists on land, so it's a pretty good way to think about the city, I think. I mean, it's a poor city, first off, right? I think we have 40% poverty rate. I mean, which is huge. You know, it's actually hard to get your mind around that that's real, that almost half the people in the city are living below the poverty threshold. What that means effectively is that everything in life is hard to do. So it's and that gets exacerbated when you have a state that has incredibly high car insurance, when your property taxes are incredibly high, when you've got deferred maintenance on your house, so your house is dilapidated and you're getting blight tickets, you know, from the city, and when we still have a system where our county seizes people's homes if they fall 2 years behind on the property taxes. You get your home sold in the third year. And what I've seen so far, and I want to be fair about this, because I do think that there's a lot of things that have gotten better in the city from money, which is not very innovative, but which is important, right? I feel like when I talk to friends, it's actually in some ways I'm disappointed, but I want to ask myself why, where it's like, what changed in Detroit? What innovative things did you do to make the city better over the last 5 years? And it's like, there's just more money here. There just is. You can see it, shops open up, there's more money. So what's happening is that things that money can solve are being solved right now, but what we don't have is we don't have governments that are honest about their finances fully, that won't let you know that they can't reduce your property taxes or help you pay on time because they like it when you pay late, because then you pay 18% interest and penalties and fees and fines on top of it. And so what I would like to see is a more open government that's willing to talk about challenges that it's having, not in a superficial way, and to innovate itself, not only be a protectorate for inviting more money into the city. And I know I kind of went off base. That's not a very clear list of things that's wrong, but it's a poor city, and there's a lot of costs. It's expensive to be poor, is another way to put it too, right? Everything just costs more, and we're not addressing that piece. We're hoping that by investing in new businesses in the landscape of the city and trying to create some more jobs in the city, which are very important things to do, that somehow that's going to come out to education, that's going to come out of lifting people out of poverty, that's going to make people more engaged. And I think it's an open-ended question right now. Is that going to work, or are we going to have a conversation in 5 years in Detroit where it's like, yeah, ooh, about that narrative, some good stuff happened, but boy, we need something else too now.
The next question.
Thanks. First of all, I just want to say, Ingrid, I appreciate you so much for being in your situation. And I know that if I were in your position and in your skin, I would be screaming nonstop until they locked me up and threw away the key. And the fact that you are articulating your position so carefully and so calmly is incredible to me. And I just want to echo what you are the only person on this stage who has consistently said throughout this panel, which is that this is about race. And if you ignore that, the money, none of it matters. And as somebody who is here for the first time in Detroit, and I'm sorry, I'm a little emotional. I've never been here before. I'm here as a business traveler. I don't have the time or freedom to explore the city with the kind of purpose that I would love to. And so as I go out and I see I want to go eat something, I want to go get a drink, I see white-owned businesses patronized by white people with white staff. And it makes my heart hurt, because this is the city that people who come in from out of town are going to see. And this does not feel like a city right now that is being revitalized. It feels like a city that is being recolonized, and I am disturbed. And I know that's not a question, and I know that the investment, the companies that are coming in, that's important. And it's not a question, but I've been here for 3 days and I'm bothered. And I just wanted to say that.
Thank you for those comments. And I do think it's an important issue that you've raised, and I do want the panelists, maybe Ingrid, to touch on it. But if we could just get the last question in, and then hopefully we could just kind of take the last couple minutes to respond.
Yeah, real quick. Thanks everyone for being here and doing this panel discussion. For those that are visiting or even in the audience here, and they're thinking, I want to help Detroit, I want to get involved somehow, what would you recommend? How would you recommend them getting involved or, quote, helping Detroit?
Thank you. Ingrid, do you want to respond to the first? I think it's an important conversation.
Yeah. So that was really beautiful and touching. Thank you. You made me a little emotional. Wow, I don't even know where to begin with that, but it is true. I do bring up race constantly because it seems like we're always afraid to talk about it. But if we're afraid to talk about it, then all we're gonna do is cause more harm. And that's why I was saying that you have to talk about it even inside. I know no one's a racist, I get it. But we have deep in our subconscious, like our culture, it's embedded in our culture, and just be really real with that. It is embedded in the way the United States has been constructed from the very beginning. It has been, the colonizing has never stopped. And so I think that if we really want to move forward, we do have to be honest and really look at our world and really come to it in full force in all our complexity, and to really unpack all of these different layers and see how that's affecting maybe, you're not tackling race, you want to tackle universal basic income, but because you're not tackling race, people are going to be left out of this conversation, okay? And so what does that mean for your home, for your community, for your neighborhood? Like, quite literally. I've traveled to places where where the racial tension is so bad, there's walls that are 10 feet high trying to protect people in their homes. Do you want to live that way? No. And I hopefully don't think that we're going to get to that point. But Detroit is experiencing this influx of people who actually don't really want to connect or be around Black and brown bodies, especially Black bodies. There's a lot of fear around Black bodies. And so, my work is really, that's why I like Afrofuturism, to help break down that fear. But, when we have this influx of people with money and all of these tech companies are coming and they're like, yay, we're coming to change, and you have good hearts, but you can't look at me in the eye, your work is nothing. It's doing nothing. And so, what I suggest is that not necessarily you grab a token Black person and you sit them down and ask them a whole bunch of questions, because that's traumatizing. So please don't do that. But looking within your community, especially if you're white, there are white people. We got some amazing white people in Detroit who are working really hard on racial justice. Jewish people who are creating coalitions with Black people, Black and brown people here. I mean, it is amazing. Yes, it is really, we are doing the work. It's not that we're not doing the work. We are very focused in trying to do it. But of course, you can't catch everybody, right? But definitely seek that out within your communities to figure out what's going on and how can we make this shift happen. As far as the restaurants go, we're in Midtown and downtown. So this is the most gentrified area that you're in. All conventions are always going to happen here. We do have Black-owned restaurants, Savannah Blue, Le Petit Zinc, Yum Village is a block away. But we don't have enough for an 85% Black city, right? It looks strange. I do understand that. So think about, what does that mean for your own city and as it's transitioning? Because I know gentrification is happening across this nation. And how can you support businesses of color? And how can you uplift that so that we can have that beautiful diversity that we love here in our country? But again, it all begins with decolonizing yourself.
We are out of time, but maybe if we can have 1 minute, is that okay to have just 1 minute to answer the last question? Whoever. And I think the question is, what can people do to kind of give to Detroit to help kind of with its comeback, revitalization, existence, all of that?
I watched Poverty Inc. yesterday, and there's so many similarities between Detroit and the Global South, and what the Global South experiences with NGOs and charities coming in and flooding the market and things. One of the things that was said in the movie, and I've said it before, you first just come and live here. Come and visit a lot if you can't live here, and just be. That's number one, because you don't know how I didn't know how I could help, and I'm from here. Just sit with it and understand the landscape. What do you really want to do? What is Detroit really actually learn about our history and please learn about our history. That full stop. And then learn about what's going on now and how that it's connected to the history. So often people are working here and have no clue about how we even got here, or that, all these beautiful neighborhoods were full of people and families, and that's how I grew up. There was no kind of devastation at all. So to always make this assumption, people come to me like, oh, you grew up here? Yes, I did, and it was great, and there were trees, and it was wonderful. It was really, really wonderful. So, just take away all the assumptions and humble yourself and just be here for a second.
Thanks, Ingrid. I think my answer to that question is everything that Ingrid said, but also just understand the story and the narrative of this city that you're seeing over the last few days, and also and not let I think the sensational stories of doom and gloom, right, take over how you see and what you're seeing, of this community. I think to what Ingrid said, come back, spend time here, and get out of just downtown and midtown, spend time in neighborhoods and spend time with residents, go to church here, and spend time understanding the identity of our city. And because otherwise, what you understand of the identity of our city is shaped by people that might actually have only spent a few hours here but decided to write about it. And so I think I would just echo Ingrid and say, come back, spend time here, understand what our city is all about, and understand kind of the fuller history of place.
Take a quick, oh, we're out of time. Maybe take a quick last few seconds.
Just in a few sentences, maybe good. If you're visiting and you have a car here, or you can get a car, I really recommend just drive around. Just drive around. We've got a pretty interesting system of the 8 mile, 7 mile, 6 mile, big cross streets, and then a spoke and hub around Woodward, with Grand River and Gratiot, and then Jefferson along the riverfront. Just drive a little bit. Just use your eyes, open your mind. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Great.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to our panelists for sharing your stories. Thanks.